So Bob, I want to give you because you were the local organizer, if you wanted to say anything, or if you want me to just sort of start with the presentation.
I think you could probably say a better introduction of yourself than I could, a more accurate one.
Okay.
Although I just remember that when I was running the first time, when David was running for president and he was here in Colorado, he immediately, when he heard that I was running, took out his wallet and handed me $20. That was really kind of
Sure, sure. You know, progressives are like that. We actually frequently put our money where our mouth is, and so I was happy to do that. So, as Bob said, my name is David Cobb. I like to say that I am a proud, I am a patriotic, and these days I am a pissed off American citizen. And I'm glad to see a couple of heads nod, and folks appreciate that, because I will also say that I use those words very carefully, and I will also consider myself a political progressive. And I think that political progressives have made a mistake in allowing the Tea Party to claim some sort of monopoly on political anger. Because, you know, if you talk to a Tea Party supporter or adherent, and you just talk to them, one human being to another, and find out, well, why are you angry? I've done this repeatedly. You know what I almost universally hear? They're angry about the fact that the Wall Street bankers who destroyed the economy were rewarded with $1 trillion of our US tax dollars. Well, you know what? I'm angry about that too, aren't you? In fact, every progressive I know is angry about that. And I think that we make a mistake if we allow the Tea Party to be the only place where the anger at that is expressed. And I'll go one better. I'm also angry about the fact that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 American children are going to bed undernourished or hungry in this country. And I don't hear that anger expressed at Tea Party rallies. I'm angry about the fact that 1 in 6 American families are currently living below the poverty level. And I don't hear that anger expressed at Tea Party rallies. And I'm angry about the fact that the economic institutions are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself, causing a runaway global climate crisis. And I damn sure don't hear that anger expressed at Tea Party rallies. And I will also say, folks, the anger that I'm describing, and the anger that I can tell so many of you share with me, the anger that I'm describing and that we feel is a righteous anger. And I use that word very carefully. I believe that is a righteous anger because, you see, righteous anger is a unique type of anger. It requires two things. One, to be righteous anger, that you have to ask, well, why are you angry? Because if you just get mad because you don't get your way, that's not righteous by definition. But it's not, so righteous anger requires you to be angry at injustice, unfairness, or oppression. But honestly, if you're angry about injustice, unfairness, oppression, and you just stew in it and wallow in it and don't do anything about it, I will submit to you that that's not righteous anger either. Because you see, righteous anger requires not only that you be angry at injustice, oppression, unfairness, but that you act on it. That's the second component. Righteous anger requires you to act. And understanding that, I would tell you that it was righteous anger that helped to provoke and propel the abolitionist movement in this country. They were angry at a depraved institution like slavery. It was righteous anger that brought those women together at Seneca Falls, willing to stand up against the patriarchal society that they were living in. It was righteous anger that helped to fuel the trade union movement in this country. Righteous anger is what drove the civil rights movement in this country. Righteous anger is a good thing. And we should acknowledge that we are righteously angry, and it will put us in touch with other Americans who are also righteously angry. And I'll also say this. Righteous anger, that is to say anger based on injustice, but that you then act on, by acting for justice, you'll discover joy. It's the most amazing thing, the emotional, psychological, spiritual component of actually being willing to engage in standing up against injustice and working for a new way is actually, I think, the invitation to our best humanity. It's the best thing that we can do as human beings, and it'll put us in touch with other people who are willing to do that. So righteous anger is a beautiful thing, and it will actually help us to become joyful even in the racist, sexist, and class oppressive society in which we're living. So I would encourage you, if you're feeling righteously angry about these kinds of injustices, to own it, acknowledge it, find other people who share it, get to work, and that'll be the antidote to your anger. It'll become a very pleasant way to spend your time. I also will tell you this, folks, that I also would say that I'm a proud and patriotic and sad American, because I can remember a time in my own life when I could say that I was proud and patriotic with no other qualifier. And for me personally, that's when I was a little boy. When I was taught that I was from the United States of America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I was very proud to be from that country, and more importantly, I was taught that the United States of America stood for liberty and justice and equality. And I was so proud of that. And not only that, but I was taught that my country was like some great shining light on the hill, and that my country was going to guarantee liberty and justice and equality to the entire world. It made me so proud, and I'm angry because I grew up and realized I had been lied to. But you know, I don't want to say I was lied to, because when I think about it in a certain way, that's a harsh word, and I actually have a face that I associate that with. I have a name. So instead of saying I was lied to, let's say that I grew up and realized that I had been subjected to a creation myth. And the reason I want to use a different word is the name and the face that I associate with that creation myth is Mrs. Armstrong. She was my 5th grade teacher. We got any current, future, or former public school teachers in the crowd? Can we get a show of hands? There always are. Let's get a round of applause for our public school teachers. I mean that. I want to thank everybody in this crowd who is a public school teacher for 2 important reasons. Number one, I don't think that we thank public school teachers often enough in this country. We certainly don't pay you enough money. But I don't think that we acknowledge public teachers often enough. The second reason I ask for a round of applause is in honor of Mrs. Armstrong. See, Mrs. Armstrong didn't go to bed at night saying, I can't wait till these little children come into my classroom so I can fill their mind full of lies and propaganda about this country. No. Right? Absolutely not. Mrs. Armstrong was a public school teacher. Like every public school teacher I had ever met, she became a teacher because she wanted to encourage children to become productive members of society. She wanted to help us to take our proper place. See, Mrs. Armstrong taught the creation myth because she believed it. And you know what? That creation myth worked on me, it worked on my classmates, and as I'm looking at how most of you are reacting to me with your nonverbal communication, it worked on most of you. You know why it worked on you, me, all of us? Because we want to believe it. See, we want to live in liberty, justice, and equality. And may I say that we want those things not because we are Americans. We want those things because we're human beings. And yes, American children want and deserve liberty, justice, and equality, and so do Iraqi children, and Afghan children, and Palestinian children, and Israeli children, and Mexican children, and Senegalese children. Point I'm making, folks, is those values are human values. And if we're really going to come to terms with the crises that we're facing today, these are global crises. The ecological crisis, the economic crisis, the series of crises that we're in now. This is a global crisis. It's going to require actually a global movement, and we are either blessed or cursed to live in a generation where we are seeing the beginnings of a worldwide movement. And that movement, of course, is being reflected in the democracy movement in North Africa, the democracy movement in the Middle East, the democracy movement in Latin America, and I say this with some humility, the democracy movement that is finally beginning to take place in the United States. Because frankly, we're a little bit late to this global movement in the United States and coming to terms with it, precisely because of the creation myth that we've been taught. And so, as I was sharing with some folks earlier, the idea of helping to nurture into being this movement and help it to really succeed is going to require us to be persuasive. And I want to share with you, because I'm trying to be persuasive, something that I knew intuitively as a trial lawyer, and now scientists are proving beyond a shadow of a doubt. That is, if you want to be persuasive, facts don't matter so much. I'm going to tell you, the first time I heard that, I thought, oh no, this is very bad news, right? Because I've invested a lot of time and energy in learning facts. And I thought if you just learn the facts and present them in logical ways, as cogently and lucidly as possible, that people will just automatically see it and will share my position. But the work of George Lakoff and other cognitive linguists are proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's really stories that matter. Which is to say, we understand the world through the stories we tell each other. And the narrative stories that we tell over and over again make up that cultural narrative. And then all of us, everybody in this room, has a frame, how you see the world, what your values are. And that's true whether you're in this room and a political progressive, whether you're a conservative, whether you're a moderate, whether you don't care about politics. But the point is, all human beings see the world through the frame that they have and the story that they already understand about how the world works, right? So, once we are presented with new facts, we process those new facts based on that story. So, since stories are what really matter, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story on how it came to be that large transnational corporations are not just exercising power today, but the story of how it came to be that unelected and unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling us. Because I will submit to you that the corporate CEOs are making the fundamental public policy decisions that affect all of our lives. Corporate CEOs are deciding how much poison will be in the water that we're drinking and the air that we're breathing. Corporate CEOs already decided what your transportation choices would be. Corporate CEOs have already decided the energy policy of this country. Corporate CEOs decide what health care you'll get, or for many of us, what health care we won't get. And corporate CEOs decided whether we go to war or not. And we, the people, are left to choose between paper or plastic at the grocery store. We get to choose between Coke and Pepsi. We can have 31 different flavors of ice cream. We can have 17 different types of toothpaste at any reasonably stocked department store. And look, let's acknowledge that those are consumer choices. And I am glad to have consumer choices, no doubt about it. But let's not confuse consumer choices with actually getting to meaningfully participate in how our society is operating, right? And so, since I'm going to tell a story about corporate rule, I'm going to make sure to cover 4 concepts together. The first concept that we're going to cover is the word democracy. That word gets tossed around a lot in our society. So to make sure we've got some shared agreement on that word, the first question that I will ask this group, somebody tell me what language the word democracy comes from.
Greek.
It's from Greek. Very well. And let's break it down. Demos means?
People.
The people. Kratia means?
Rule.
Rule. Nicely done. So literally, the word democracy, by definition, means the people rule. Quick pop quiz. How many folks believe we, the people, are ruling in the United States? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. Look around. There's not a single hand in the air right now. I do this presentation all across the country. I did 150, maybe 160 of them last year. I'm on track to probably do 180 by the end of this year. Sometimes they do an evening presentation, afternoon presentation. The fact is, folks, I ask that question everywhere, and you know what? Almost nobody raises their hand to that question. And you know what? That is a problem. But looking at it another way, I would say it's a good thing. What? It's not a good thing that we, the people, don't rule today, but I'm telling you it's a good thing that nobody's raising their hand to that question anymore. I think it's a good thing that we're finally growing up, that we're being willing to be courageous enough, that we're willing to confront the scary reality that notwithstanding the creation myth that we were all taught in this country, that we don't actually rule ourselves. That there is, in fact, a small ruling elite making all of these decisions. I think it's a good thing that we're coming to terms with that, but not so that we can just be cynical about it or that we can just be right about it and smug, but that by diagnosing the problem, it suggests the solution, right? That I think is very important. And that brings me to my next concept, which is the word sovereignty. Now, if I just had the word the sovereign on the board, what would you think of? The sovereign. The king, right? Almost all of us, I bet that's the word that popped into your head, the sovereign. That's because the word sovereignty means the authority to rule. And because stories are so important, we come, in this country at least, mostly from a European tradition. And 500 years ago in Europe, the king was the sovereign. The sovereign was the king. That's the story that we have been taught culturally, and that's the reason that, unbidden to you, if I just say the sovereign, most of you will think of the king, right? And by the way, where did the king claim his authority to rule? God. You don't get more legitimate. I mean, that's a big deal, really. You know, having your authority to rule come from God. And to really underscore this, to really illustrate it, I'm going to do a quick little exercise together. I'm going to invite this library to please close your eyes and do this little exercise. This is always a lot of fun for me. You'll see. I will invite this crowd to close your eyes and say, David Cobb is the king. I told y'all this was fun for me. And as the king, David is God's representative on earth.
That's a little much.
That's a little much. All right. I'm going to try this last bit and see how well this goes over. And therefore, anything that David says must be obeyed without question. He is our ruler. Okay. All right.
The second one opened my eyes.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you this, folks. And this is the point in the presentation where I would normally say, okay, open your eyes. But to your credit, Colorado Springs, nobody has your eyes closed. Good on you. Right? The second thing I'll observe, though, is that you did what every group does whenever they realize what I'm asking you to do is you all laughed at me. Did y'all notice? And there was a collective laugh coming out of the crowd as soon as you realized what I was asking you to say. And you know why you laughed? Because it's funny. Right? And not funny as in, oh, David has just made a very witty and droll comment. No, it wasn't that sophisticated. I mean, a comedian would say, I just used absurd humor. I said something that was absurd, so your only reaction really could be to kind of laugh or chuckle at it because it's crazy. To say that I get to tell Misha how to live his life because of who my parents are, or even better, that I get to say how all of society is going to be organized because of the divine right of kings. I mean, of course you laugh at it. That is absurd. It's funny. It's kind of crazy. And 500 years ago, human beings just like you and me, we not only said it, but we believed it. See, I want you to take a moment and think about the fact that who has the authority to make the decisions about how people organize themselves and how we govern ourselves. This might be one of the most important questions that any people ask for themselves, right? It's an important question. And you know, it's true, as Bob mentioned in his earlier comments, I'm a Green Party member. I'm proud of that. I'm equally proud to say that I work very closely with Democrats on issues where we have common ground. I have a long history of doing that. I'll tell you this, I've also got a history of working with conservatives and Republicans on issues that we can find common ground on. When it comes to civil liberties, it's often Republicans and libertarians who are fighting for those civil liberties. And I'll join Republicans in coalition on such issues. I've also got a history of working with anarchists and socialists on issues where I can find common ground. I say that not so you'll pat me on the head, but so that you'll really appreciate what it means when I can tell you that in my 25 years of efforts at social change work, I've never had the privilege or the opportunity to work in coalition with a monarchist. And 500 years ago, that's all there were. And 500 years is the blink of an eye in human history. I mean, guess what I'm getting at is this. When people tell me that the effort to amend the Constitution is too hard, we can't make that kind of change. We can't do that. You have to be reasonable. I think, have you not been paying attention? The level of profound fundamental change that has taken place in human relations in this country are profound. Because if enough people think that something is true, and enough people act like it's true, it will be true. honestly, folks, I think it's important for us to recognize that that's how reality operates. And if it is true, as I asserted earlier, that the United States is a fundamentally racist, sexist, and class oppressive society, and it is, then maybe we ought to start thinking differently. Maybe we ought to start acting differently. Maybe we ought to actually start imagining that we could do something about it and that we could actually change it. And that brings me to my next topic that I want to make sure we cover, and that is the concept of legal personhood. Please note that I don't have the word corporate personhood on the board, but legal personhood. That's because the concept of legal personhood means literally the ability to assert rights. And because we're talking about legal personhood would mean the ability to assert rights under law and have those rights acknowledged under law. And may I suggest that the concept of who is a legal person has been one of the fundamental questions in this country. It's been something that has been struggled over and fought over. This is an important question. And it's a question that most of us today don't really think about, but if we frame it the right way and think about it the right way, we'll understand who has personhood matters, and it matters a great deal. The last concept I want to make sure we cover is the word corporation, because I think that word is also important. I'm going to ask the same question. What language is the word corporation from? Latin. It's from Latin. Let's break this one down. Corpus means body. And now for extra credit, anybody, the suffix tion in Latin? It means to have or create, or the inherent quality. So literally, the word corporation means to have or create body. And by body in this sense, I mean literally physical body. That's because we are taught in law school. By the way, are there any lawyers in the crowd besides me that would admit it? There's one hand, right? And I can't help but to notice, when I asked any lawyers, I got this. It's a friendly crowd. We're going to be okay. But the reason I want to ask is to see if you remember this, and I really do. Being taught that a corporation is a legal fiction. That sound absolutely right. See, with adamant, my sister at the bar remembers being taught that a corporation is a legal fiction. And now watch this. Even if you can't precisely define that, but if you've just heard the phrase that a corporation is a legal fiction, if you've heard that, even if you weren't subjected to law school, if you've just heard that a corporation is a legal fiction, please raise your hands. Be honest, raise your hand. Look at all those hands go up. So a corporation is a legal fiction. Corporation is a legal fiction. Corporation is a legal fiction. That begs the question, what does the word fiction mean? Untrue. Untrue. Made up. In law school, we are literally taught that a corporation doesn't actually exist in the physical world. But we will pretend like this group of individuals and the resources and the money and the material and the contractual obligations and the cultural assumptions surrounding all of this very deep concept, we're going to pretend like it exists in the physical world just so that we can treat it a certain way under law. And remember, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, it's true. Poof! We can create a corporation. By that I mean a corporation is a construct. It is constructed by the willingness of enough people to simply believe that it exists, and we can start to organize things in a certain way. And the word corporation is Latin because the first corporations ever constructed by the genius of human creativity and imagination was during the Roman Republic. Not, by the way, during the Roman Empire. And sometimes I wish we spent more time asking, what happens when a republic devolves into an empire? Because that might be an important conversation in the United States. Just saying. Or, as the great Texas comedian Bill Hicks would say, just planting seeds. Just planting seeds in the crowd. But the thing is, the first corporations ever created were created during the Roman Republic for a reason. For example, y'all heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Yeah, here it is, 2,000 years later, we still say it. Check it out. That road system was built and maintained by a Roman corporation. Likewise, the aqueduct system, that amazing bit of engineering that moved water all across the Italian peninsula without electricity. I mean, I want to stop for a moment and just acknowledge how clever humans are. And that fills me with such great hope and optimism to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is not a single problem that is facing us today that some clever person or group of people do not already have a solution for. The problem is not that the solutions don't exist. The problem is we just don't have the political power and will to be able to implement those solutions. Right? So, but that aqueduct system of Rome, it was designed by, imagined by, created and maintained as a Roman corporation. Likewise, the first universities and the first hospitals, can you guess? Corporation, corporation. So, a pop quiz, what does a road system, a water system, a university, a hospital, what do they all have in common?
People use them.
People use them?
Public.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get to. That each one of those things are basically public projects or public infrastructure. The genius of the idea of a corporation is to take private money, material, and resources and put it to a public use. But there's another way the government takes private money. What's that called? Taxes. Now, and I'm not here to denigrate taxes. Not at all. In fact, have y'all heard that the United States is in a budget crisis? Yeah. Y'all might have heard that, right? Guess what? It's a lie. We're not in a budget crisis. This country is producing more wealth and value than any economy has ever produced. We're not in a budget crisis. We're in an allocation crisis, which is a different way to think of it. In fact, if we wanted to solve this misnamed budget crisis for real, there's a very simple 3-word solution that involves the idea of taxes. If you know it, you can say it with me. Tax the rich. Problem solved. And I don't mind telling you, I wonder why we don't hear people saying that in public more often. Because honestly, polling data shows that that's a winning argument. That's a winner, folks. We don't even have to convince people that we ought to have a fair and equitable tax system and tax the rich. It's only the corporate media and, frankly, their lackeys in Congress who actually control the tax policies that don't agree with it. But what I'm getting at is we should not be afraid to talk about taxing the wealthy and increasing taxes on the rich. It's a winning story. And it's a story that people from across political ideologies, for the most part, agree with. So I'm not here to denigrate taxes, but I do want to point this out. When the tax person shows up, does she or he say, hey man, time to collect taxes, would you be willing to pay, maybe? I mean, sir, has that been your experience? No, not been my experience either. And it wasn't the Romans' experience either, because when it was tax time during Rome, the centurion showed up with the spear and said, pay up. Taxes were then and still are and should be mandatory. The difference with the corporation is that you took private money and material and resources and organized it on a voluntary basis to put it to public use. So at its core, the concept of the idea of a corporation when first created was to take private money, organize it in a voluntary method. You're not compelling people, but you put it to some public use. For example, I might say, sir, I've got this great idea. It's going to really help a lot of people. Would you please just give me some money so I can make this happen? And under contemporary terms, we would think of that arrangement more or less as a nonprofit corporation. Or if I said, hey, I've got this great idea, it's going to help the public a lot, I need some money to get it done, but if you invest a certain amount of money, I think I can return a profit for you. You'll have a return on your investment. In contemporary times, we would think of that as a for-profit corporation. All I'm pointing out is whether it's for-profit or non-profit, corporations, at its essence, this is the concept of what they were. Of course, and I want to repeat that this is a genius idea to think about these constructs this way and to organize human endeavor this way. David Cobb is not anti-corporation. The Move to Amend Coalition is not anti-corporation. The problem is not with the corporation as an instrument per se. The problem is with the legal system and what we're doing with it and what we're allowing it to do. Because frankly, this is not exactly how the modern transnational corporation operates, is it? That's because the modern transnational corporation actually comes out of the 14th and 15th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery. I have to put discovery in my imaginary quotation marks in the air, right? Because what did the Europeans discover in the 14th and 15th century? Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Newsflash, there were people living there. They weren't lost. They didn't need to be discovered. And so, in the same spirit of not only truth-telling, but honest and courageous truth-telling, let's just tell the truth. The 14th and 15th century of Europe, the age of discovery, was not the age of discovery at all. It was the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. For me, there's one word that sums that up. It's the age of empire. And see, that's what imperialism means. It means beating people down. It means killing them. It means taking their things and making it your own. And folks, the modern transnational corporation wasn't just accidentally created during the age of empire. The modern transnational corporation was created intentionally and deliberately as an instrument of empire. One of the earliest and most famous of the early corporations was a joint stock company known as the East India Company. Literally designed in its inception to militarily conquer the entire subcontinent of India. And not only that, but to destroy the existing institutions of India. So that all those institutions that heretofore had been making sure that people were fed and clothed and that they were governing themselves, their sovereignty, to destroy their sovereignty and to make them dependent upon new rulers. And not only that, but to create new social institutions so that those people were actually participating in stealing the resources out of their own land and sending them to the shareholders of the East India Company as profit. The point I'm making, folks, they were teaching those Indians a new story, to teach them a new narrative and a new way to think of themselves. The point I'm making, colonialism and imperialism really done effectively doesn't just colonize your physical body. Imperialism done well, colonialism done well, colonizes your mind. It makes you think differently. And may I suggest, I believe that we in the United States of America are colonized. We have been colonized by a ruling elite about how economics must work, how they will work. We've been colonized by how society has to be, to the point that for many people, it's almost impossible to imagine anything other than the systems in which we live, even though we know the systems are racist, sexist, and class oppressive. We know that these systems are destroying the planet. But for most of us, many of us, it's hard to even imagine something else. And I'm saying, it doesn't make us bad people. It means that we have been colonized, but more and more people are waking up, and that makes me happy. Now, another of the early corporations was a joint stock company known as the Africa Trading Company. Would anybody like to guess what the Africa Trading Company traded?
Africans?
Thank you. I heard two words being said a lot, and so I'm going to use myself as an example. And I'm not proud of myself, but I think it's important that I own this and say it out loud as a white person. I asked the question so I know the answer, right? And I've done this presentation several hundred times, but I promise you, if I'm just being kind of lazy or casual, not really thinking precisely, if asked, what did the Africa Company trade? The word that will usually pop into my mind, unbidden to me, slaves. The Africa Trading Company traded slaves. After all, the cultural story that I've been taught since I was a little boy was the African slave trade and runaway slaves. There's this whole thing. See, I'm owning it not because I think I'm a bad person. I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person, actually. Ask anybody who knows me. I'm a good person. But I will tell you this, I'm also a colonized person. And that's an example of it. It may seem small, but it's kind of important. Because now that I've made such a big deal about this, let me ask the follow-up question. Was Africa at this time populated by slaves? No. Africa was populated by people. And may I say, Africa was populated by people who were basically just like me. And I say that with a little trepidation, but I also say it with conviction. Because if you ask any scientist, if you ask any biologist, she or he will tell you race does not exist. Sure, skin pigment exists. I'm not stupid. I know that I'm white. But I can say that Africa was traded by was populated by people basically just like me, because if you ask any scientist, they will tell you race doesn't exist. Sure, pigment exists, even ethnicity exists, but no scientist would elevate those rather trivial distinctions to a classonomy, or a taxonomy or classification. So race does not exist. But check this out. Racism damn sure does. How can that possibly be? Well, remember, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, it's true. Poof. We can create race. The point I'm making is race is a construct as well. The corporation is a construct, race is a construct. And just as the corporation got created for a reason to facilitate imperialism, I will tell you that race got created in order to try to justify slavery. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying that the imperial age or these early joint stock companies or these other early corporations created slavery. Slavery had pre-existed that era, but that was different. I'm going to use Misha as an example. Let's say that Misha and I belong to different tribes, and there's a river separating my tribe from Misha's tribe, and my tribe goes to war against Misha's tribe, and my tribe wins the war against Misha's tribe. And by the way, why do y'all think my tribe might win this war? What are some reasons? Why might my tribe win the war?
You're bigger.
Bigger, more humans. That's a big one.
Technology.
Technology, better weapons. Those are the two that come most quickly to most people's minds, like larger populations, better technology. But I haven't really given you enough data or enough background to know why my tribe wins the war against Misha's tribe, right? So right now you're just speculating. Shall I tell you why my tribe wins the war against Misha's tribe?
Sure.
Because I'm telling the story. See how important that is? I'm telling you, stories matter, and who is telling the story matters a great deal. Unfortunately for you, Misha, I'm telling the story. So my tribe wins the war against Misha's tribe. I put my spear up against Misha's throat, and I say, Misha, you're now my slave. Quick pop quiz. What is the intellectual or philosophical justification for David to enslave Misha?
Economics.
Argument of the stick.
Power.
Well,
Power. I mean, what many of you have said in different ways is, it's the spear. It's power, nothing more. The point is, slavery at that time was nothing more than domination, power over. There wasn't even a pretense that there was an intellectual or philosophical justification. So at the age of imperialism, or the growth of imperialism, also corresponded to the growth at the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, when it became necessary to provide intellectual justification. And so I submit that race gets created as a construct during this time period in an effort to justify, as stupid as it is, as idiotic as it is, and frankly as sick and disgusting and depraved as it is, the idea that one would enslave an entire group of people over something as trivial as skin color or pigment. Race got created as a construct for a reason. And folks, what I'm getting at is this. Corporatism, imperialism, and racism are inextricably linked concepts. And what links them all? Oppression and exploitation. And I'm not the first American to say that, because one of the great American political orators of all time said basically the same thing in what I believe is his best political speech. Now, it's not this fellow's most famous speech, because his most famous speech is, I Have a Dream. Who am I talking about? Martin Luther King, of course. And by the way, I Have a Dream is a beautiful speech. If you have not actually heard it, not just read it on paper, do yourself a favor if you haven't heard it. Find it available at any of the technology sites. Listen to it. It is uplifting, it's inspiring, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. It's like a psalm, really. You know, it's powerful, but it's also just beautiful. And so I'm not saying that I Have a Dream is not a good speech. What I'm saying is, honestly, it's not King's best political speech. Because for my money, King's best political speech was not delivered in Washington, D.C. I think King's best political speech was delivered in New York City, specifically in Harlem, very specifically at the Riverside Church. I see several of you know this speech. I'm talking about Beyond War, or Beyond Vietnam. And in that speech, King said, the United States of America is suffering from a spiritual and moral decay. Stop for a moment. King was a man of faith. This is very strong language for a reverend. The United States, he said, is suffering from a spiritual and moral decay. and that this decay is caused by the triple evils, again, a strong word, the triple evils of racism, militarism, and extreme materialism, or just greed. And King said the United States can't become the country that we want it to be. King said the United States can't become the country that we deserve it to be. And King said we can't become the country that God intends us to be unless and until we address those triple evils. And folks, what relates all those together, extreme greed, racism, militarism, oppression, and exploitation. These are inextricably linked, and if we understand the root of the corporation, we can see those links as well. And so, since I've finally gotten around to America in my little story, here's another question. How many colonies in the founding of the United States? 13. 13. Come on, y'all, everybody knew that, right?
Yeah.
Like, did everybody know that?
Yes.
Yes, everybody knew that. So here's my real question. How many of those 13 colonies were corporations? Ah, it's a hard question. Well, it's a hard question because it's also a trick question, because it depends on how we define it. Because I'll tell you in one very important way the answer, all of them. And by that I mean, remember that the word corporation means to have or create body? Well, I will tell you it took the king to create every one of those colonies. He created them. The king created Massachusetts. Now somebody might be thinking, no, Massachusetts was already there, the Cape was there, and that's why it's a trick question. The land was there, the people who lived on the land. You know, physical reality was actually there, but it took the king to create Massachusetts. And the king created Massachusetts by the use of a legal instrument. Does anybody know what that legal instrument was called?
Charter.
Say it louder.
Charter.
Nicely done, sir. It was a charter. And to illustrate how the king created these colonies by the use of the legal instrument known as a charter, let's do another little exercise together. In this exercise, I'll be the king. Why might I be the king?
You're always,
Because you're telling us.
Because I'm still telling the story. I'm telling you, folks, it matters. Stories matter, and who tells the story matter. The more we start to ask ourselves these kinds of questions, Fox News, the more it will become the case that we will start to see with some clarity what's really going on in the world. So,
not just Fox News, dude.
oh, well, thank you for that. Can we say actually corporate news
There
or
you go.
mainstream news? Because I don't even like to say mainstream news. Let's just call it what it is, corporate news. You know, because NBC is actually the General Electric Corporation, ABC is actually the Disney Corporation, CBS is actually the Westinghouse Corporation, right? So, good catch, sir. Thank you, because it does matter who's telling these stories. Frankly, you know what? If all the stories that we were hearing were actually coming from, say, Emily's List or the National Abortion Rights League or you know, the National Organization for Women, we might wonder, well, why are they telling these stories? What are their motives? They'd have motives. Maybe corporate America has motives for the stories that they tell. I wonder. We should think about that. Anyway, back to my exercise. I'm going to be the king, and I, the king. Now, Misha, it's going to be good to sit with you. So I'm going to make you a governor. Watch this. I am the king, and I have all political power. And with this power, with nothing more than a pen and a piece of paper, I'm going to bring into existence Massachusetts. I'm going to create Massachusetts. But of course, I'm not going to bother with the day-to-day affairs of administering and handling Massachusetts. I'm the king. I've got other people to rape and pillage and plunder and murder. You know, kingly duties to do. So instead, I will assign a royal governor. And now I will quote from the actual language of the original charter that created Massachusetts. I, the king, will assign a royal governor the responsibility to plant, rule, and govern this new area to benefit me, the king, and to benefit the shareholders of the joint stock company known as the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. Massachusetts began, folks, as a for-profit corporation just like the East India Corporation did, literally designed for no other reason than to vacuum up the resources and the wealth and bring them back to the shareholders. Likewise, Virginia did not begin as the state of Virginia or even the Commonwealth of Virginia. It began as the Virginia Company, a for-profit corporation. Hell, Georgia was a penal corporation. By the way, does anybody know what color skin the original slaves who worked for the Georgia Penal Corporation, anybody want to guess what color they were? White. I'm telling you folks, as white people, we should spend a little time asking who constructed race and whiteness to begin with. Not just race in general, but this whole idea of whiteness and being white was created for a reason. And in fact, I think that reason was just to keep us away from, at least the working class whites, to try to make us feel superior somehow over something as trivial as pigment, because they did not like the fact that working class white folks were working together with black and brown folks and actually realizing the economics of how the system was currently operating. These things matter. Now, the thing is that in our current contemporary times, we wouldn't call Misha a royal governor. In contemporary times, what word would be used to describe Misha's operation today? Say it louder. CEO, or a chief executive officer. The point I'm making is, if we understand the story from one perspective, the American Revolution was not just a rejection of monarchy and the divine right of kings, but the American Revolution is also a people's uprising against corporate rule. It's an uprising against the illegitimate authority of these CEOs to be making decisions. You know, another way to say it, folks, the American revolutionaries were not calling for a more socially responsible king. Maybe today we should do more than just ask for more socially responsible corporations. I mean, after all, I'm tired of collecting all the data and information to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that certain corporations are causing asthma, and would you please not do that? Or that there are cancer clusters being caused by corporations, and would you please not do that? Or Massey Coal Company, would you please not kill quite so many coal miners? Or British Petroleum Corporation, would you please not destroy the entire frigging Gulf of Mexico? I mean, is that really all this movement wants today that we're part of? A little less death? Like, is that really our rallying cry? Can't we raise our aspirations a little higher? We're Americans. We have a different legacy. Because frankly, those people who would become revolutionaries, about 10 years is not a long time, but about 10 years before the American Revolution actually erupted, those same people who would become revolutionaries, they were writing letters to the king that went like this: "Oh, Father King, we, your humble and obedient children, come before you on bended knee, because your royal governor is administering unfair trade laws, not just taxation without representation, but unfair business laws and international foreign trade policy. These policies, oh, your majesty, are benefiting the East India Company, these laws that the English Parliament are making." Quick pop quiz. What percentage of the English Parliament making these laws do you think owned shares in the East India Company?
Well, gosh, it'd be pretty high.
Say it again, sir.
It would be fairly high, you would think.
This fellow behind you actually had the exact number.
100%.
100%. I wonder if that's related. Oh, Father King, would you please intervene on our behalf? We, your obedient children, come before you, your majesty. It was the most sniveling, groveling language you can imagine. I've read these letters, and it's serious. It's actually true. They were literally groveling before the king. And I don't know about you, but I am keenly interested in asking myself, what stories did they start to tell each other? How did they start to think about themselves and power and rule? What was it that convinced them to stop the boot kissing, to stop groveling before the king and the divine right, and that it is the way it is, and convince those people to stop begging and pleading and to get up off their knees and to stand up straight, and, as King would say in a different era, to find some steel for their backbone. So they stood up straight and true, and to look directly at the king, you know, the king who claimed cultural authority from God, and to see behind the king the most powerful military the world had ever assembled, and said, "You're done, get out. We're going to do it different now." Because let me tell you something, folks, that experience, what I'm just describing to you, that is magic. And I want to be clear, if one person stands up against injustice or oppression, that is courageous and it deserves our thanks. If one person stands up against injustice or oppression, We should applaud that and be grateful for such a person being willing to do it. But that alone is not magic, not the way I look at it. Because see, the magic happens when one person stands up against injustice or oppression, and somebody to her left stands up with her, and somebody to her right stands up. See, the magic only can happen when there is a collective standing up and a collective action. At this point, may I just say, may the goddess bless the Occupy movement. Yeah? I think the Occupy movement is magic, and I mean that sincerely, because the Occupy movement is actually a collective expression by ordinary folks to do something and to act collectively. And, you know, look, I worked on the global justice movement in the 1990s, and I'm proud of that work, but I also think it's important that we all be willing to be self-critical. And not in a harsh way, but in an honest way to say what works and what doesn't. And so, as somebody who worked on the global justice movement in the 1990s and put a lot of effort into that, let me just say that one of our great success stories was when me and 40,000 of my closest friends had a little party in November of 1999 in Seattle, Washington. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? The World Trade Organization ministerial meeting. Anybody besides me there, actually? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Raise your hand. All these hands go up, right? So we're talking about the World Trade Organization. So I'm proud that I was there and helped organize to get people there and to shut it down. Why were we doing it? Because the ruling elite were meeting to make decisions for the rest of us. And when the ruling elite were meeting to make decisions, we wanted to meet and protest that and bring attention to it. And so when the ruling elite met at the International Monetary Fund a few months later, we gathered to protest. When the ruling elite gathered at the World Bank, we gathered to there as well. And so I'm proud of that work. I'm not trying to denigrate myself or my comrades and colleagues who worked on that, but I will tell you this, folks. Let's just acknowledge that what we were doing every time the ruling elite met to make a decision, we would meet to protest. And when the ruling elite left, we left. Right? So I gotta say, kudos to some genius who said, hey, I can't help but to notice that there's a place where the ruling elite are making to make decisions all the time. That's Wall Street. Let's go there. And secondly, the genius idea that said, oh, and you know what? They don't seem to ever leave, so we're not going to ever leave. The third thing that the Occupy movement acknowledged was, you know, there's also ruling elites everywhere. So instead of just coming to Wall Street, you can come if you want to come. We'll welcome you to Zuccotti Park, but we invite you to occupy your own public spaces. Wherever you live, work, and play, that's where there ought to be an Occupy movement. Because the fourth genius idea of Occupy was they're not just challenging us to occupy public space. The Occupy movement challenges us, invites us, dares us to occupy imagination space. I mean, I think it's just a brilliant idea. You know, what Occupy does is that kind of magical moment. And I think that it's worth pointing out that no matter what the ruling elite does, the genie's out of the bottle in this one sense. The stories are beginning to change already thanks to Occupy. Now, since we know that the king who created the charter gets thrown out, and we know that the king is not going to be sovereign anymore, we know that a new charter gets written to describe how our society is going to work. A new instrument to create the supreme law of the land. What's that called?
Constitution.
The U.S. Constitution. Folks, how many people here have read the U.S. Constitution? All right, good. I'm glad to see all those hands raised. I will presume that the others who didn't want to raise your hands. Because if you haven't, read it. And I'll tell you, when you read the Constitution in its entirety, not just individual words, but as my mama taught me to do, son, read the whole thing and look at the pattern. Or, as she would say in another way, son, just step back from the tapestry so you can see everything and see how it relates to everything else. When you read the Constitution in its entirety, I will submit you will see two principal actors at play. The first actor is the most important actor. In fact, it's so important it's the first three words.
We the people.
All I ever have to do is put my hand to my ear, and folks say in unison, we the people. That's because these are hallowed words in this country, and they should be. See, we the people come together to create the second actor, which is government itself. And let's just stop for a moment and understand and acknowledge, we the people create government. Government does not pre-exist us. We create government. It's ours. Properly understood, government is nothing more than a construct that we have collectively decided to bring into being. See, we the people are described and understood in this document as being free and sovereign. And what does the word sovereign mean again? The authority to rule. We have the authority to rule. The king is not sovereign anymore. We kicked his butt out. But check this out. Government isn't sovereign either. In fact, to the contrary, government is subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom? The people. Government is accountable to whom? The people. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it? I like how this is going. Let's continue. We the people are free and sovereign because we the people have rights. Government does not have rights. Government only has duties. I'm going to stop for a moment here and underscore, if I have the right to do something, it means I can do it and I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need the City of Colorado Springs City Council to give me permission. I don't need the Colorado State Legislature's permission. I don't need the federal government's permission. Man, I'm from Texas. I don't need my mama's permission. If I have the legal right to do something, it means I can do it. And government cannot properly infringe upon my ability to exercise these rights. Civil liberties are powerful, profound things. These civil rights mean something. And government never has rights over the people. In fact, government only has duties, and duties are different. A duty is something you have to do even if you don't want to. It's a responsibility. And where do these governmental responsibilities come from, or these governmental duties? Well, remember, all power resides with the people. All power is with the people. In fact, that's another one of those magical phrases. To prove what I mean by this, I'm going to invite you to do something. Another little exercise. I'm going to say 4 words and ask you to say them back. You don't have to do it, but I would invite you to do this. I'm going to say, power to the people.
Power to the people.
I'm going to say it again. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
One more time. I'll say, power to the people.
Power to the people.
And now look at each other. I'm not even joking. Just look at each other. Almost everybody's smiling right now. Right? And you know why? I think that phrase is a magical phrase. And it's not just the words written down. Honestly, it's not even saying the words. To invoke the magic, we have to say the words out loud, together, and believe it. Because you know what? We do have power. We have so much power collectively as a people. The problem is we're not exercising it. The problem is we haven't gotten on the same page to collectively make and implement the decisions and demands that we have culturally. But the reality is we, the people, do have power. And frankly, we have all the political power. And now, a quick pop quiz. What is the population, more or less, of Colorado Springs, Colorado?
450.
415,000. That sounds very precise, so I'm going to go with this. 415,000. So I will celebrate the idea that 415,000 folks here have all the political power. That's a wonderful thing. That's a beautiful thing, but I'll tell you this. I don't want to go to the meeting of 415,000 people where we decide where to put the stop signs. And I like political meetings. I'm not going to that one. Anybody in this crowd up to facilitating a meeting of 415,000 people where we make some decisions? I didn't think so. See, another way to think about it, folks, is we, the people, have all the political power in any jurisdiction that we're going to be thinking about, but we intelligently delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Do we delegate all of our power to government? No. Only enough of our power so that government can perform the duties that we have already instructed government to perform. And, by the way, government is limited only by what we have told them that they should do. Government doesn't have any other power to do this. How does government discharge those duties? By enacting laws. Local, state, or federal laws. Laws that are understood to be in the public interest. Can I just underscore that it is an appropriate thing to debate what is in the public interest, that there's not going to be universal agreement. But if we have a functioning democratic republic, the laws that are enacted are by definition, at least at that moment, for that time, the expression of the public will. But the one thing that government can never do, either the local, state, or federal government, is to pass a law in the public interest that violates the private human rights of any of its citizens. Wait a minute. Mrs. Armstrong may have been right after all. Look at this. Look at the whole thing. In our constitutional framework, we the people are free and sovereign. We have all the political power. However, we the people will delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Government, which we will insist will be subordinate and accountable to the will of the people. Government will be tasked with certain duties that we have said that they must discharge. Government discharges their duties by enacting laws, local, state, or federal, that are in the public interest. But the one thing government can never do is pass any law that violates the private rights of any of the human citizens. Isn't that brilliant? Look at it. It protects our civil liberties, but it also has a public communitarian ethos. Isn't this a wonderful framework? Isn't this brilliant? This is actually beautiful. We should try that in this country. This would work. And I'm not even joking. This would work. And I'm also not joking. We've never tried it. Because before I go 1 second further, waxing poetic about the brilliance and beauty of the United States Constitution, time out. Somebody tell me what year the U.S. Constitution gets either drafted in secret convention or gets ratified.
1788.
1787 is the Constitutional Convention. Nicely done. 1789 is the date that it actually becomes ratified. So 1789 is the date that the U.S. Constitution becomes the supreme law of the land. Now, since we now understand that legal personhood means the ability to assert rights, who gets to be a legal person in 1789?
White men.
White men. All white men, Bob?
No.
Only the property owning of the white men. So saying it another way, if you're not white, you're not legally a person. If you're not a man, you're not legally a person. And even if you're a white man, if you don't have enough money, you're not legally a person. So honestly, as beautiful as this framework is, and it is beautiful, the problem isn't in this framework, but the problem in the inception of this country is the application. Because you know what percentage of the adult human beings living in the newly formed United States in 1789, you know what percentage could actually assert their rights? What percentage? 10%? 1%. You know, actually, I will say that this whole 99% meme is another brilliant story. But honestly, if you want to actually get down to not just the rich, not just the really rich, but the really stupid, crazy rich, you know, that like the percentage that are really like utterly, completely in control, the billionaires who can actually run everything, it's actually more like 0.0008%. But I'll tell you, we are the 99%. That's a great meme and a great chant. Much better than, we are the 99.87328%. So please keep using the 99% meme. But honestly, tell me your first name again? Jim. Come on, Jim, 1%? That's so cynical. It's not 1% of the humans who were people. It's 5%. Only 5% of the adult human beings living here could actually, literally claim to truly be people.
My cynicism hasn't caught up.
Stay with me, brother. Another way to express this.
I just want to say real quick, I wonder how many of those 5% actually fought for our independence in the Independence War.
Almost none of them.
That's what I was going to say.
Almost none of them. Almost all of them, in fact, were loyalists or who believed and wanted to maintain the divine right of kings because it was working just fine for them. So another way to express this 5%, of course, is 95%. 95% of the adults living here were not people with rights under our Constitution. Frankly, the founding of this country is a founding violence. A founding violence against the indigenous who were already here and subject to intentional, deliberate genocide. That truth needs to be told. It's a founding violence against the Africans who were brought at the barrel of a gun and forced to build this country. This country was built with slave labor. Barack Obama occupies a White House built by formerly enslaved Africans. That truth needs to be told. It's a founding violence against women. This is not just that women couldn't vote. I mean, that's kind of a trivial distinction. Women couldn't even enter into contracts. You know why? Because they didn't have the legal capacity to make decisions for themselves. Women were considered like children. And women couldn't own property. Women were property by any reasonable understanding of that word. And it's a founding violence against most of the white men, because most of the white men did not own enough property and were not wealthy enough to actually be fully persons. Most of the white men were either indentured servants or at best second-class citizens. So another way to look at this, folks, is as the late great Howard Zinn did, and may the goddess rest his soul. Howard Zinn said, history requires a lens because you're looking back in time. And probably the most important lens to look at U.S. history, our story, is as a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as persons with rights acknowledged by our Constitution. That's so important, I'm going to say it again. And I'm going to ask you to remember the history of our country is a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as persons with rights acknowledged and respected by our Constitution. So some people might say, all right, Cobb, you got a scathing indictment of imperialism of 500 years ago, but hey man, we got rid of slavery. Women can vote. It's all good now. To which I say, au contraire, mon frere. It ain't all good now. It ain't all good at all. And a big part of the reason it ain't all good is the operation under law of the most dominant institution on planet Earth today. What's that institution?
Corporation.
The corporation. And so, since we've just described how our government is supposed to operate, and I hope that this is helpful. Is this helpful for people?
Yeah.
Does this make sense? I'm getting a lot of affirmative headlines, so this makes sense. So now it behooves us to ask, well, where would a corporation go? Before I put the word corporation on my little chart, I want to ask this question. What does it take to form a corporation in Colorado today? Say it again. A charter. How do you get that charter? You file some paperwork with the Secretary of State, and you pay a very trivial filing fee. And as long as you filled your paperwork out correctly and your trivial check clears, do you know what the Secretary of State will do? Rubber stamp it and issue you a charter. You know how long your charter can last in Colorado today?
Indefinite.
Another way to say, sir, forever.
Eternal life.
It's got eternal life, longer than any of us. And, by the way, do you know what you can do with the corporate charter under Colorado Corporate Code today? Anything legally permissible, all lawful things. That's what your Colorado Corporate Code says today. Now, I say this to really underscore that these corporations are the dominant institution of our time. And we don't even really think too much. We just assume that this is the way it is, the way it always has been, the way it always must be. I say this now to take us back to 1789. And let me now tell you what it took to form a corporation in 1789. First, you had to get a bill introduced in the lower house of your state Senate, or lower house of your state House of Representatives, and it had to pass by a majority. Then that bill had to go to your state Senate, and it had to pass by a majority, and then that bill had to go to the governor, and the governor had to be willing to sign it. Does that sound like a corporation today? Of course not. What did I just describe today?
A bill.
A law. How a bill becomes an actual law. Anybody besides me ever worked to try to get a law passed or lobbied to get a law? A lot of hands go up, so let me ask, how easy is that? Right? Christy's literally laughing out loud. I can tell Christy is somebody like me who's lobbied to get laws passed. The point is, just the mechanics of jumping through those hurdles is a very high standard. The thing is, that's just the application. It was once so difficult to get a corporate charter because the process of limited liability was tightly guarded. It wasn't a right, it was a privilege. Oh, and by the way, as you made the application, you had to identify a public need that was not being currently met by either business that didn't have limited liability or by government. So you had to identify a public need. And if you were granted the privilege of limited liability, do you know what you could do with your corporation? Only the specific thing that you had identified. And if you did anything else, any other kind of business, do you know what happened? You lost your charter, Bob. It was revoked. The doctrine was known as ultra vires. Sister, remember at the bar, Corporation 101? Beyond the authority is what ultra vires mean. Corporate charters were once routinely revoked in this country just for doing more than what they had been originally chartered to do. Oh, and by the way, do you know how long your corporate charter would last?
7 years.
7 years, 10 years, but Bob, you're right. Every corporate charter was limited in time. And every corporate charter dissolved at the end of that time period. And even if you were doing the specific thing that you had been granted your corporate charter to do, even if you were in the narrow time period that you had been granted your corporate charter, if you were ever known or proven to do anything that violated the public interest, do you know what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked. Corporate charters were routinely revoked for just acting outside the public interest. I want to ask an honest question. Which of the Fortune 500 corporations could even exist today in their current mode of operating if we had these same laws in effect that we once had in this country? Not a one. Zero. Now, surely we could all name thousands, hundreds of thousands of small or mid-sized businesses that would still exist, but none of the major institutional players could do what they do if we just had the political restrictions that once existed. This is not David Cobb's wishful thinking. This is not just the Green Party platform, although it is, actually. But I will say that this is our history. We should know our own history. The point I'm making is this. There was a time in this country where the corporation was properly controlled. Now, I'm not saying that 1789, the next 100 years of this country, was the land of milk and honey. Of course not. Slavery existed. The patriarchy was real, and it was oppressing women. Working class white men were being systematically abused. What I'm saying is the instrument of the corporation was appropriately controlled under the political process. So now that I've given that background, can't we see that it takes an action of state government to issue a corporate charter? That corporate charter can be used to define the corporation as subordinate and accountable to the entities that create it. We understand that the corporate charter can describe the duties of what a corporation can do. And I will assert that we should only allow this limited liability to come into existence if it serves the public good, or certainly we shouldn't let it continue if it is against the public interest. So with all that as background, isn't it just obvious that a corporation should be under the democratic control of the body politic? And so folks, here's the punchline. Thank you for your patience. Because when the U.S. Supreme Court, in an act of supreme judicial activism, says, even though the word corporation is never mentioned in our Constitution, 5 of us are going to tell you, the rest of the 385 million Americans, that you collectively have to treat these entities known as corporations as if they're persons with rights. And when you do that, folks, it perverts this whole framework. Corporate personhood is not just an illogical idea, which it is. Corporate personhood is not just a stupid idea, which it is. Corporate personhood is not just an insult to the history of this country to simply say that concentrated capital somehow can claim the same rights that it took other human beings struggle and effort and cultural change to be able to define themselves as people. When the court just says that concentrated capital can claim constitutional rights, it perverts our framework. It makes a democratic republic an impossibility, because it means no matter how hard we work to pass any law, some corporate lawyer can just waltz into court and have that law overturned, which is why corporate personhood is used to overturn environmental protection laws. Corporate personhood is used to overturn public health and public safety laws. Corporate constitutional rights is used to overturn worker safety laws. And most recently in the Citizens United case, corporate personhood was used to overturn campaign finance laws. Our law is designed to protect the integrity of our electoral process, and we're told you can't do that. Well, I say ya basta. Enough already. It's time for we the people to rise up like movements have done before us in a nonviolent way and say, it's our country and we're going to decide how our Constitution is going to be operating. And if you want to join this movement, I want to invite you. All you have to do, folks, really and truly, I got a little petition for you, and I want to be clear about this little petition that I'm about to pass out. This is not a petition that we're going to submit on bended knee to any elected official. This is an organizing petition. So what I'm going to do is start here and ask if you would like to join this movement, please sign up so we can be in touch with you. We want you to join over 200,000 other Americans who have already joined this movement. And Keenan, I'll come back to you at the very end if you'd like to join, because I hope you will. But I will say this, if you don't want to join this movement, you don't have to. Just pass the petition. I won't be offended. I'll be surprised. But I won't be offended. But I will say, if you're going to sign it, and I hope you each do, print legibly. Man, as an organizer, there's nothing more frustrating than not being able to be in touch. So, Steve, if you have that handwriting like I do, slow down. Take your time. All of you, really. And then the second thing I'll ask is, if you want to not only just be aware of this movement and what's going on, but if you actually want to help to organize a local affiliate of Move to Amend, we have over 110 of them across the country. You probably know that Boulder Move to Amend actually won this at the ballot box recently. I hope that y'all will stand up and do it too. If you want to organize a local affiliate, put a little asterisk next to your name so that we can be in touch with you and continue to build this movement. This movement is growing faster than anything I've ever been part of. And it's also the most systemic thing that I've ever been part of, because it goes to the core issue of who rules in this country and who has the authority to govern ourselves. So, as this comes around, I'm going to now ask if anybody wants to make a comment, ask a question, raise your hand and keep it up. Sir, you'll be number 1. Sir, you'll be number 2. Really? 2 people? Number 3? Number 4? Women don't ask questions or make comments in Colorado Springs. Bob is number 5. It's just that as a male feminist, I just like put that out there as an observation. It's okay. I mean, but my mama taught me to just make those observations. I think it's helpful.
Well, your goddess approves.
Thank you, sir. All right, so let's do this. We'll go through those 5, and then we'll do another little stack. But before I get in, Bob, I have to ask you, how much did I charge you to come here today? What did I charge you?
No, Chrissy
No,
charged us $100.
Christy's like that. Christy knows how to raise money. We like Christy. Honestly, folks, my charge was the same fee I charge everywhere when I travel the country. 0, not a dime. The reason I ask that is because I'm going to ask, I thought for sure as a Texan coming to Colorado, I would see a few more hats. Well, there's a hat. It's not exactly, honestly, the hat that I thought I would see. Here's another hat, although I do like it. It says peace. That's good. Can I borrow your hat too, sir? Another one. Really and truly, I thought I'd be looking at different hats in Colorado, but that's okay. But what I'm going to say this, I'm going to pass this around. That's right. It's an old-fashioned pass the hat. And as it comes around, I want to be clear that in my tradition, we call this a free will gift, which is if you don't want to give any money, don't. You're free, and please do stay. Don't feel like you have to give money to stay. But I will say, as it comes around, please consider that nobody funds this movement except for us. There's not corporations funding it, and honestly, the foundation world is not funding it. It's just ordinary people. And if you're able and willing to write a check, the name of the organization is Democracy Unlimited, which happens to be a nonprofit corporation that never claims constitutional rights. But if you don't have your checkbook with you, but you're willing to take down this information, you can mail it to P.O. Box 610 in Eureka, California. That's right, I have found it. 95501. So I'm going to just start this hat on this side, and y'all just pass it on this side, and this hat just gets passed this way. And if you don't want to give money, you don't have to, really and truly. And so now, finally, let's go to number 1. Yes, sir.
I'd like to give my $20 worth here.
Here. Yes. So you can give.
There's something that came up in the news the other day, and it reminded me that there's a lot of people in the movement, in the Tea Party movement, and there's a lot of people in other movements. There's a lot of people in the centers, center right, center left, progressive, and they all agree on one thing if you speak to them. I go into people's homes all the time, and they all agree that there's corruption in government. All of them. Every one of them agrees that there's corruption in government. And so this news article just came up recently about a guy in Adams County. He's an assessor. You probably have all seen it. You see it? Yeah, and evidently what he had done was he had given very, very low assessing on this guy's millions of dollars worth of warehouses, and the guy who had the warehouses had given him a lot of money for his campaign. And so this was reported in the Denver Post as something that was obvious corruption.
Which it is.
And even more important than that, there was something else that happened too, and that is that he got some baseball or football tickets from that same guy, and that's an illegal gift, and evidently the campaign thing was bad, but this was even worse because there were football tickets or something. I don't know. But I looked back in the archives of the Denver Post, and there was evidently like 9 or 10 references since 2010 of this guy and the warehouse guy all being in cahoots, and nobody's arguing with this. Nobody. This is pure corruption.
You know, I
Now,
really...
well, wait. My punchline is this. That's just small potatoes. We're talking about tens and hundreds of millions of dollars being given to local candidates, to state candidates, by these multinational corporations. And this is considered by the vast majority of the people to be, oh, no problem. It's just hundreds of million dollars being given to Republican candidates. I hate to be, but that's essentially what it is. And there's the other way too, but percentage-wise. And I think that the word corruption, what I'm requesting is that the word and the reason of corruption be included in this and defined along with all of this. You can't do that necessarily in the actual amendment. By the way, on your I saw your website before I came over. Do you have something on the website that gives a prospective language to this amendment?
Absolutely, it's on the website, and all you have to do is go there and write and look at proposed amendment, and it's on there. And the brochure that I just passed out has our exact proposed amendment. And I want to be clear.
Is that cast in stone?
Well, I mean, it's what we're proposing. It's not cast in stone, no. But I will tell you this. We don't believe that any artificial entity has inherent inalienable constitutional rights, and we don't believe that money is speech. So the point is, if you can help us to improve it, we'd love to hear it. But if you're asking us to weaken it, we're really not interested.
No.
I'm just letting you know. I'm just letting you know.
I brought up the word corruption myself. It's not like I'm trying to weaken it.
I know you're not. I'm using you as a foil at this point, which is to say, the one thing that makes Move to Amend unique of all the different entities coming together, I think, are that we were the first and so far are the only group that has actual proposed language that says only human beings have constitutional rights. For-profit corporations don't have constitutional rights, and neither do nonprofits. And it's the reason why principal conservatives are willing to join us, because we will make that statement. Legal entities like corporations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, have legal privileges, but those legal privileges are part of the political process. Inherent constitutional rights only belong to human beings. And secondly, money is not speech, and it can be regulated. And we believe that you've got to do both of those things to have an amendment that's actually worthy of support. And I acknowledge that Common Cause, at least in Boulder, joined with us in that effort, and would welcome Common Cause and any other group that's willing to take that strong statement. We're willing to work with them. But right now, Move to Amend is building a movement to make that political reality happen. Number two. Yes, sir.
I think you may have already referred to it. It seems to me I sent a check off last week to Common Cause in support of this amendment. And as I recall, they did not have specific language included. So how again are you coordinating with groups like Common Cause?
Well, look, since you've asked the question, I think I want to acknowledge first and foremost that groups like Common Cause have done incredibly important work historically, no doubt about it. And honestly, when it comes to the corrupting influence of money in elections, Common Cause has been doing that work for 20, 30 years. It's basically part of the reason that they came into being now, what, 35 years ago? 40 years ago? You know, so when it comes to money in elections, Common Cause probably is, you know, the longest standing of the DC-based groups that do it. I will also say this, and I say it with humility, I've been working on corporate constitutional rights or corporate personhood for over 10, almost 15 years. 15 years ago, Common Cause was not taking this issue up. They thought it was naive and unrealistic and couldn't be done. The Move to Amend campaign is shifting their position, I think, and they're seeing that there's a movement, and they're looking to collaborate with us. So far, Common Cause has not been willing to, as a national policy statement, say, here's our proposed language. So,
Can I make a
Please.
quick comment? And I can't speak for National Common Cause. I'm on the board of Colorado Common Cause.
oh, we met last time I was
We
here.
did, yeah.
I know, it's
Well,
like, I affected
yeah.
that. Yeah, it was a different place though, it wasn't here.
In Pueblo.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah. And Common Cause is well, I haven't checked what's on the national website right now, but we're very close. And I think the one difference right now, probably between where Common Cause is and Move to Amend, is that I don't know the National Common Cause is all the way on the corporations are not people totally, completely in every sense. They are totally on the.
Money is not speech.
Money is not speech, and they are totally on the corporations do not.
Should not be able to give
have
money.
constitutional rights in terms of campaign
Right.
expenditures and contributions. And which is
Right.
a step short of where Move to Amend is.
That's right, and I want to say, first of all, thank you for that. Secondly, we're patient, Common Cause is going to come around. And I mean that, like, I hope that you heard me being respectful to Common Cause, I hope you
Yeah.
heard me really acknowledging Common Cause, but I also hope you heard me saying, we're not going to compromise. And I don't think that movements compromise before the fight really begins. Didn't we learn anything from the single payer struggle? Not to repeat that. So here's the thing, sir. I do think that part of the reality structurally, Common Cause is a national-based group based in Washington, D.C. In large part, they see the world through that D.C., what's possible in this Congress or the next Congress. That's their lens. Doesn't make them bad, it just means that that's structurally sort of how they operate. My daddy taught me, son, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks kind of like a nail. The difference is we're interested in building a grassroots movement first before we go to Congress. We look for opportunities to work in coalition with anybody, but I would tell you this, we're the group putting people out on the road, out in the ground. I hope you'll take a look at Move to Amend, make a contribution as well, not just to Common Cause, but also to the work that we're doing. So it's not either or, it's both and. And again, I want to thank you for being here.
And we're increasingly working.
And we're increasingly working together.
With
Yes.
Move to Amend
And others, and others. So number 3, I'll come to you, Misha, in just a moment. Who's number 3? Yes, sir, Jim.
I feel strongly about this, but another thing I feel strongly about is I really don't want to get any more emails than I have to.
Okay,
And I already signed up
okay.
for Move to Amend and volunteered for it, and
Oh.
actually volunteered to help a guy by the name of John Hobson, who I think is here. Is he here?
John Hobson?
No,
He's not
apparently
here.
not.
He knows
was
about it.
working on a meeting with the city council, a city council member, which I think he may not understand what he's getting into, but if I sign this, am I going to get another set of?
Not another set, no. And,
Will this be different, related to Colorado Springs? Or?
yes,
Okay.
yes. And what I'm going to do, Jim, is did anybody feel so obliged or inclined or motivated to put that asterisk that I was asking about? Do we have a couple people? So what we're going to try to do is organize a local affiliate, a Colorado Springs affiliate of Move to Amend. And I'm going to actually, if anybody is willing to take the responsibility of inputting those names and sharing them, I'll leave these names with y'all and then ask you to input them nationally. So you'll only get one and you won't get any more than you're already getting from national. And Jim, as you know, we only send out an email about once every,
Right.
what, 3 or 4 weeks, more or less? 2-3 weeks at the most. And they're all very focused on this. We don't share our email, we don't, et cetera. So that's a long way to say, no, you won't get any more, but we will put you in touch with people locally because we don't yet have a Colorado Springs affiliate.
Has anyone else here gotten in these emails about John Hobson?
I met John
Oh, you
and
did?
I informed him about this meeting, and I know he's working on Move to Amend and is interested in providing leadership. I understood that he was.
Okay. All right, but he's not, no one designated as the sovereign of.
No,
Yeah.
no. In fact, at this point, I do not believe we have an affiliate in Colorado Springs. We would like there to be. Yeah?
It'd be amazing if we did. We have a congressman here who has been designated the most conservative man in Congress, and he's being run against by another Republican who says that he's too liberal.
Well, let me say this.
That's actually what's happening right
Fair
now.
enough, but I want to get, let me just address this very quickly. Principled conservatives agree with us that corporations don't have constitutional rights. Polling data shows that, and it's our job to build the movement to hold elected officials' feet to the fire. That means both conservative Republicans, it means liberal Democrats, it means we've got to actually build a movement that takes itself appropriately seriously, like other movements did. We're not there yet, but I'm telling you, I believe genuinely within 5 years, you're going to see, maybe less, you're going to see the issue of corporate constitutional rights become the central political issue of the day. It's going to be like slavery was in the 1850s. And you remember, when's the last time anybody got a door knocking or a mailer or a brochure from the Whigs? They don't exist anymore. And remember that the Democratic Party and the Whig Party both agreed on slavery. The Republican Party was formed as an abolitionist movement because there wasn't a political expression. And I will tell you this, and I say it as candidly, honestly, my assessment is this. The movement that is represented by Occupy and Move to Amend and other efforts like this, if we do our work, we're either going to transform the existing political parties or we're going to destroy them. And honestly, I don't care which one it is. I don't.
Or both.
Or both. I don't care. And you know what? If and when the Democratic Party becomes the party championing Move to Amend, David Cobb will join the Democratic Party or rejoin the Democratic Party. Right? Because this is the core issue of the day. I don't care. And if the Democratic Party leadership continues to resist, then I will try to destroy it. And I hope you will too. Because let me tell you something. Principled liberals have been lied to and sold out by the ruling class of the Democratic Party. But you know what else? Principled conservatives have been lied to and sold out by the leadership of the Republican Party. I think our job is to speak clearly, straightforward, honestly, so that liberals and conservatives alike can agree and understand that we've lost control of our country and that we shouldn't just be kowtowing to the leadership of either of the two parties. And that's why, you know, Christy, when you first came in, I said all those kind things about you and the Democratic Party because I know you're a progressive like I am. And I don't care what party you're with because I know you and I can work together. So I don't care. And when I find Republicans, if a new Teddy Roosevelt type Republican were to somehow emerge on the scene, I'd be willing to work with her or him. It doesn't matter about party labels, folks. What matters is that we have the courage of our convictions and that we actually act accordingly. That's where the sweet spot is. Who's number 4? All right, we'll do another quick round. You're dead. They were all boys, I know that, so.
Actually, it's sort of off topic a little bit. This is more historical nature and what you were talking about, the corporations and the charter, you know, the founding of this country after '89. Was that in direct reaction to what existed before? Did the founders put those very strict?
I would say it was in great part, not exclusively, but in great part, because remember, the American Revolution really was, in large part, a people's uprising. Look, the Boston Tea Party, did children still play that out at pageants in elementary school? I mean, I myself was Indian number 3 at Baycliffe Elementary. When we were playing that out, you know what the Boston Tea Party is, don't you? It's an act of nonviolent civil disobedience. It's an act of nonviolent civil disobedience that included property destruction. Nobody got hurt, so it was still nonviolent. But that property destruction was worth $1 million in current dollar figures. $1 million worth of tea was dumped overboard. Quick question. Was all the tea in Boston Harbor dumped overboard that night? Does anybody know? Say the answer, ma'am. No. No. It was one company's tea. Do you know what company? The East India Company's tea alone. It was clearly the buildup was the recognition that these corporate entities had been used illegitimately and inappropriately. Thomas Jefferson, one of the great founders, notwithstanding, let's just man-owned slaves, so it's not like he's, perfect. But he was a quite brilliant man, and He said, right after the revolution, about 10 years later, he said, I fear for my country because the moneyed corporation, let me get it right. Jefferson said, quote, I hope we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of these moneyed corporations that dare already to challenge this country to a trial of strength, end quote. Most of the American revolutionaries were very clearly concerned about corporate entities, but they saw that they could be used for good things. So they were properly controlled in order to do massive public projects like the Erie Canal, canals or roads or bridges. Like big public projects were still used by corporations, but they were very tightly controlled. So were they put into place intentionally? Absolutely, and it was because of their history.
Hamilton was the champion of those.
How about that? The difference between Hamilton and Jefferson is worth looking into. Who's number 5? Bob, is that, yes, it's you.
I'm also mindful that it's 10 minutes after 8, and
We're gonna get out of here.
Out of here by 8:30, so that they.
10 minutes left.
But there is one bill before the Senate called Joint. Are you familiar with it? The Joint Resolution 29, Joint Senate Resolution JS Res 229, which John Madsen was working on, and I've been in communication with him, but trying to call Senator Mark Udall, because Senator Bennett has signed on to it. It's sponsored by Tom Udall in New Mexico and Murphy from Washington State, which has a lot of the language.
It has only a little bit. I think it's way weak, Bob.
Oh, I agree with you, but at least, it would be, by co-sponsoring that joint Senate resolution, you are saying, that you recognize that this is a major problem.
Fair enough. But I would say this, though, folks. I think movements, or efforts at movements in this country over the last 20 to 30 years have made a mistake by immediately going to Congress and trying to get something out of Congress. Move to Amend is different because we're going into local communities, trying to get local resolutions passed that are not compromises, but actually do what Boulder did to say, money is not speech, and corporations don't have any inherent constitutional rights, only human beings do. And that, when we put it on the ballot, we win it. Not only in Boulder, not only in Madison, but also, most recent victory, West Allis, Wisconsin. Anybody know West Allis? It's a very conservative suburb of Milwaukee, almost all white, wealthy, and voted for McCain overwhelmingly in 08, Bush overwhelmingly in 04. Republicans outnumber Democrats by a long shot. And that was on the ballot in the last election, which was a primary election. Remember, a primary election where the Republican presidential nomination was still highly contested. In other words, huge Republican turnout in a highly Republican district. When we put Move to Amend on the ballot there because of citizens initiative process, we won by over 70% of the vote. Wow. This is a winner. This is a winner. And this is the thing, Bob. I mean, I respect you bringing this up, but I think that we would do better to focus on local efforts that are actually what we want them to be. We build from the grassroots up, we empower each other, and frankly, what I've noticed about national politicians and leaders is that you work like hell to try to even get them their attention. But if they see a parade, they break their arms trying to get in front of it. Let's build the movement, and they'll come along. So that's how I think about it.
Unless they're bought and paid for.
And then they'll never come along, and then we'll replace their ass.
I just wanted to say that it's revelatory that the next senator from Colorado who has an election coming up is the one that won't sign that.
I agree with that, and I hope people will vote accordingly. So let's do another round. I saw number 1, maybe you're number 2, number 3, number 4. Let's do these 4. And
I just have a quick comment that's related to what Bob said.
Okay, go ahead. We'll let you jump this time.
I appreciate your answer, but I also wanted to ask how you think Senator Bernie Sanders' proposal measures up to this.
Bernie Sanders has the best But it's still not good enough because Bernie Sanders has explicitly created an exemption for nonprofits. And I think that that exemption is intellectually dishonest, quite honestly. You know, it's not, first of all, it's not true, that artificial entities that are for-profit don't have constitutional rights, but artificial entities created under law that are nonprofits somehow have the same rights as living, breathing human beings, doesn't make any sense. Number two, it's politically not very smart, because we can't get conservatives to join a movement if it looks to them like, oh, you want to disempower, you know, the Chamber of Commerce, but you want to help out the nonprofits that you like. Number three, it's also honestly like not just political feasibilities, it's actually not very thoughtful, because don't you see the ruling elite will just create more nonprofits? You know, nonprofits like Citizens United, the nonprofit. So it's the best one that's out there, but it's still not good enough. And again, just as I told the Common Cause, we're patient. Bernie will come around. You watch. There's no doubt. So let's go here, ma'am.
Okay, under the heading of the long tradition of regular people voting against their self-interest, what would be the position that could create, you know, what are we to expect the position to create fear of something like this will look like?
The right-wing media is going to try to, or corporate media is going to try to paint this as anti-business. They're going to try to paint this as communist. They're going to try to paint this as un-American, which is why you heard me so carefully say I am not anti-corporation. And that's the language that we need to use. You also heard me talk about the story of America and how proud I am of America. We need to speak as ordinary Americans. And I want to think of it this way, like, let's say that Nisha, it's a hot summer day, and Nisha comes over, and it's not hard to imagine a hot day in Colorado Springs in the summer, is it? Not so much, right? So let's say Nisha comes over, and I'm cutting a tomato with a knife, and Nisha says, what are you doing, David? I said, I'm cutting this tomato. I said, I'm going to make a gazpacho soup. Would you join me? Is that knife good or bad? It's good, right? I'm making a soup. I'm going to share it with my new friend. Now imagine, same scenario, hot summer day. Nisha comes over. He says, David, what are you doing? And I say, ah! And I jump at him with the knife. Put the knife to his throat. Is the knife good or bad? It's a trick question. Say it again, Jim. It's the same. The knife is an instrument. We have to understand that we're not anti-corporation. We're anti-corporations having constitutional rights. And we can hold that frame, notwithstanding how the corporate media tries to reframe it. If that's the frame, we win, regardless of whether somebody's a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, regardless of their ideology. Corporate media is going to try to say that we're anti-business. We are not. They're going to try to say that we're anti-American. We are not. We need to learn our own story, our own history, tell that story in the way that you just heard from me. But that, ma'am, I think is what they're going to try to do. Number two.
You don't have to drink with me. I'm just curious. I'm sure you have an opinion on this, and I am curious about what you think your true chances are with something, even though this is very focused, it's still the whole back panel of a trifold, in comparison to the simplicity and focus of the Equal Rights Amendment.
Oh, I think we're going to win this amendment, and I think that we'll win it in 10 years. For real. I think that we can amend the Constitution in 10 years, because this has actually got more popular support than even the Equal Rights Amendment did, certainly in the 70s. So I think that we'll win. I think that we'll win in 10 years. And I'm glad you brought up the Equal Rights Amendment, because I want to point this out. My mama, who worked on that effort, will sometimes say, I'm just heartbroken, son, that we lost that battle. And this same woman at other times will say, son, I'm so proud that we won. Now, is my mama schizophrenic? No. It depends on how you're framing it, because the Constitution wasn't amended, but the political struggle that she and other courageous women like her were willing to engage changed the politics of this country. Gender roles are fundamentally different. Some women in this group are old enough to know the difference between the world you lived in as a little girl versus the world you're living in now. And honestly, I'm not saying that we've won it all, but acknowledge the fundamental changes that have been able to be made because of the elegance and simplicity of women have equal rights, and that worked. So that's my quick reaction. Number three, My trick only works if you remember your numbers. Who was number 3? Who was number 4? There you go. You remembered yours.
Well, a couple more comments about Common Cause and then a question for you. Common Cause is working in local communities also now, and probably Model A moved to amend on this.
We welcome you.
But we're on the ballot statewide in Montana.
Is it I know that petitioning is going on. Did it qualify yet? Or?
Well, I don't know exactly where.
But petitioning is going on.
Yeah, and I don't, I'm confident it's gonna.
Oh yeah.
It's
a winner. It's a winner.
Yeah, and so we're in that battle too, and I'm probably getting way ahead of things here, but we were looking at Colorado, a statewide initiative in Colorado. Funding is always a problem. In this day and age, you got to buy signatures to get on a ballot, and
you don't have to, but
well,
we'll talk about that. Go ahead, finish up.
But we're also looking at local community in Colorado, and the #1 target would be Colorado Springs, because it's seen as the center of the conservative center of Colorado. I have no doubt that if we got on the ballot in Colorado Springs, it would pass in Colorado Springs. I'm just absolutely confident. Get it on the ballot is the issue. And so that's something that Colorado Common Cause may be doing. They haven't made that decision, but we're working on it. If there are people who are interested in that, I'd be interested in talking with them. And then my question for you here, the approach that the Common Cause is taking is voter instructions, and it has a long history in the U.S. Most of the delegates to the Continental Congress, most of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention went with voter instructions. They weren't just elected, go and do something here. They were sent with very specific instructions about what they were to do. And in the early days of our country, there were senators who were sent to the Senate with instructions from their states, who felt they could not vote the way they had been instructed to vote, and actually resigned. A couple of the early presidents, when they were senators, resigned from the Senate when they didn't feel they could vote the way they had been instructed to vote. So we're using that concept of the voters instructing our elected officials to do these things, and that's what the Common Cause resolutions are worded that way. We instruct our congressional delegation to approve a constitutional amendment. We instruct our state legislators to approve, ratify that amendment. That's the kind of framing we're using. And I know you've talked with Derek Cressman, who's managing the point person for National Common Cause on it. I'm interested in your reaction on the voter instructions approach.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I agree with it, and that is the history, and think it's good. It is, in essence, the way that we've been doing it as well. I appreciate the fact that Common Cause has more precision in the language, specifically calling it a voter instruction. So that's all good. I will say this. I would encourage, request that Common Cause actually collaborate with Move to Amend more explicitly. We've welcomed your involvement in the efforts that we're doing. If you're going to do Colorado Springs, you need to work with us and make us partners, not just we're in charge, you do the work, right? So I'm putting you on the spot. I would love to see that happen. You and I met in Pueblo. I remember at the time you didn't think that it was possible to get Common Cause to move, and within a short time period we've seen movement, and that's great. Yeah. And I'm saying, with respect, Common Cause needs to take a partnership position, not a we're in charge, we're the DC based groups, because we are building capacity at the local level. We want to work with you. Let's have a Move to Amend Common Cause collaboration in Colorado Springs. And I'll tell you this, sir, we could get it on the ballot here with volunteer effort. I guarantee you can get it on the ballot here. We got it on the ballot in Salt Lake City, Utah. We got it on the ballot in West Dallas. We got it on the ballot in Boulder. We got it on the ballot in all these places without paid petitioners. And honestly, with respect, you could have got it on the ballot in Montana with the volunteer energy. It just takes more time and more effort. And I say this with respect. It's because we have been doing the work of traveling around the country, having meetings like this, getting people ready. So we think you start locally and move up. And again, will you promise me that Common Cause will work with us and move to amend here in Colorado Springs?
So I certainly will.
All right, there you go. That's a great way to end it. I want to thank Bob Kinsey, thank all of you for coming out. And lastly, I want to thank you, whoever is watching this. Remember that the only reason you're hearing this right now is because the guy behind the camera, his name is Mike. He's a people's media person. This isn't corporate media, this is people's media. You're watching it because Mike didn't just hate the media, he became the media. You need to get involved. Move to amend.org. Peace.